Good evening and welcome to another episode of Awaaz in Focus, an initiative of Azad Awaaz. This monthly patrika aims to focus on the marginalized sections whose voices are often muted in the cacophony of flashy mainstream media discourse. When referring to the marginalization, this platform does not aim to restrict itself to the traditional focus on social aggregates like caste and race alone, but aspires to include a discussion on class, gender, and sexual orientation, among many others. In this issue of Azad Awaaz, we would like to focus on documenting and understanding the plight of the doubtful voters of Assam through a socio-political legal lens. The process of being categorized as a doubtful voter creates differential experiences for different people. The aim of this edition is primarily to unpack the ways in which the process of proving one's citizenship becomes exceptionally burdensome, especially for the economically marginalized. For Awaaz in Focus, we would like to understand the inadequacies involved in the legal procedures of categorizing doubtful voters and how that in turn affects people in varying degrees, affecting some more than others. We also want to explore the ways in which the state bureaucratic and legal processes involved exacerbate the situation and intensify the emotional as well as financial stress among the doubtful voters and their family members. Today we have with us Dr. Salah Punathil, who is a sociologist and assistant professor at the Center for Regional Studies, University of Hyderabad. His research interests include ethnic violence, migration, citizenship, and the Muslims in South Asia. His research also focuses on the migration of Muslims from the present-day Bangladesh region to Northeast India and the crisis of citizenship and ethnic violence in contemporary times. It is great to have you here with us today, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
With reference to the first question, in your article, Precarious Citizenship, Detention, Detection, and Deportability in India, you bring up the concept of precarious citizenship. How can you explain the tag of doubtful voters through the lens of precarious citizenship?
So to begin with, in fact, the idea of precarious citizenship is now widely used in the Western context, especially in the context of the migration of population from different countries to Europe, more specifically. I have employed this idea of precarious citizenship in Indian context, especially in Assam, as you have said. So the idea of precarious citizenship, let me just briefly explain it. So precarious citizenship is actually a term which I thought is important to use basically to kind of, address or overcome the categories which are already there in our context, like say illegal migrants, undocumented migrants, refugees, stateless, etc. While these terminologies are important and meaningful in its own ways, sometimes these are used, without having enough sensibility to the context that we are talking about. So precarious citizenship as a term, in a sense, allows us to transcend, these sort of binaries and allow us to look at categories of populations who are having certain notion of citizenship, but not having full benefit of a citizenship in a national state, right? So, and precarious citizens are those who are, subjected to vulnerabilities of various forms and do not have a fuller participation in the social and political life in a national state, despite having certain kind of citizenship status they have. So this lack of access to the resources, fuller resources in the society in which they live characterize the precariousness. That's why we call this as precarious, and the precarity is experienced in multiple ways, such as poverty, displacement, health crisis, in the settings in which they live. So, and precarious citizenship as an idea also, gives us a sense about how the in a nation state, how the arbitrariness of the state practices, like say, sometime identifying somebody as citizens, then stripping off the citizenship rights, or keeping in between the status like D voters, these sort of ambiguous positions, and I mean, one is precarious because of the ambiguities of their status as citizens and so on. So it makes sense in our context as D-voters precisely for this reason, that D-voter is a status which is a liminal status. It's neither here nor there. Means citizens or those who lives within within India, like in Assam context, I mean, they have, they don't have a fuller access to the resources. At the same time, they are also not fully stripped of their citizenship rights, so they can't vote. They don't get certain kind of governmental benefits, etc. So this ambiguous, tricky status of a large chunk of population in Assam could be best described as, precarious, right? Precarious citizens, and that's how I thought of using this term as a useful category to understand the plight of this population who struggle to get access to the resources of the state.
Thank you so much. You tied it up in such an interesting manner, and I really like the way you brought up the term liminality in terms of how the doubtful voters are neither here nor there. So they are neither Indians and nor they are foreigners. So that's a very interesting concept that you brought here. So moving on, the Citizenship Amendment Act, which is the CA, and the National Registry of Citizens, which is the NRC, have garnered immense attention and led to an outcry among the public. From Shaheen Bagh to London, different places across the globe have witnessed anti-CA and NRC protests. So, however, I feel it's quite surprising that the category of D-voter, which was actually introduced in the year 1997, continues to silently function as it renders innumerable people as stateless. So my question to you is, while both NRC and the D-voter are mechanisms of the citizenship crisis in Assam, why has the former gained far more attention and the D-voter issue is barely known?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question because, in fact, my essay begins with this point that there is this humanitarian crisis in contemporary Indian scenario, precisely because of the CAA and NRC, and there is a lot of public attention to it, and there has been protest and wider debate on the question of citizenship in India, and especially the Assam context, precisely due to the NRC-CA situation. But my point, in fact, in the essay was basically to look back in the history past at least 20, 30 years and see what has been happening in this region. And in order to read NRC and CA better, one need to have some sensibility of the history of the region in terms of the plight of the migrants. So coming back to the question that why D-voters as a category and the crisis of such a population has not been adequately discussed, because I think some of us, at least people who are not from the region of Assam, assumes that the crisis of citizenship in Assam is something new in the current political scenario, and the question of detention or detection of people is something that we encounter in the contemporary situation. But we need to have a sense, we need to know the history of it, and there is in my view, there is a longer history of detection of people and even detention of people. I mean, people were kept in detention center for years, since 2000 and so on in Assam. And one need to understand that history to read the present scenario better. And D-voter becomes quite an important category to understand that history, because it is the D-voters largely who then lived in detention centers or still living in detention center, not people who are left out from NRC are actually not going to detention center, right? So the one who have experienced the actual crisis of citizenship is, I mean, of course, those who are left out from NRC is going through a great difficulty in current situation, but even more deeper experience of rightlessness has been already there in the region. So why this is not sufficiently debated is an interesting point. So I think to understand this, I think we need to talk about a slightly different concept called deportability. Because, why NRC and CAA today? I mean, NRC has been there not just in the current political scenario. It's been a long process and culminated in this situation of, large number of population losing the citizenship. But CA, if you read NRC's, recent context of NRC and the introduction of CAA, I think we need to see the idea of deportability. And deportability, what I mean here is the condition of a condition which create a sense of fear among the people that they may get deported, or the state gives an impression, or there is a constant threat of stripping the citizenship right and sending to a different country. So deportability is not about deportation per se. People may not actually get deported to a different place, but there will be always a looming threat of displaced from their place, right? So that's what, when we say a lot of people are left out from NRC, means there is a state is actually giving an impression that you will be taken away from this place. And CAA specifically, that a particular minority population would be actually displaced from the place. And for me, why this gained a lot of political currency, because deportability functions or help certain vested interest of those who are in the power. So one of the important factor is how it helps to consolidate religious nationalism and sentiment around the religious Hindutva politics, in current contemporary time, which consolidate the vote bank, etc., in the name of religious division. So when you invoke the question of illegal migration all the time, and when you talk about the presence of illegal migrants and talk about the necessity to send them back to Bangladesh, that kind of a discourse has a particular political effect, that it would consolidate the vote bank politics. It would it would facilitate the majoritarian politics. So this is a function of the deportability, that you don't have a provision to deport back, but you create a condition of deporting, right? So likewise, I mean, deportability is also about other kinds of, like, say, economic interest. Like, you can use the cheap labor of the identified illegal migrants because they are vulnerable, so you can exploit them. So there are many other dimensions to deportability, but I'm talking about this specifically to indicate that the focus on NRC and CAA and its wider attention today is precisely because of the intention of the state to create a particular kind of notion. So even if you talk about CAA, which actually gives an impression that certain sections of population would be given the citizenship status even if they are illegal migrants, and they would be protected, right? But in actual scenario, if you look at it is extremely difficult for people who belongs to the Indian majority community, to gain the status of citizenship, because there are a lot of other legal practical complications. But it was just thrown to the people to give an impression that to make the division clearer, to give an impression that you are protected, and by saying that you are actually consolidating the vote and you are actually invoking certain religious community sentiment and so on. So in this process, as you rightly pointed out, some of these questions like devoters and the history of these politics has been forgotten in Assam, and that is where we have to go back to 1990s and so on to understand why and how devoter as a category become important. So I mean, to answer your question, devoter has been there for a longer time, and it had serious impact in the way in which people live, or those who have encountered that status, those who lived with that status, have encountered a lot of problems for decades. and that has not been taken into consideration even when we talk about, even when we have a critical reading of it or critical debate on it. I think that aspect is not really been taken seriously. But I believe that in 1990s, like say when devoter, 1997 precisely, when the devoter as a category came into being, definitely there were political controversies and political debates, perhaps not with the same kind of intensity that we have today, but and there was a different political party which was in the power at the center. But it was always a political issue. And since, I mean, at that time, I think late 90s, there were a lot of political, turmoil around this question. So perhaps, it subsided over a period of time. But then I still believe that, we have to read such a history, even to understand the present time.
Thank you so much. I think this answers a lot of the queries that I had, because I always used to think why most people outside of the region do not really know about doubtful voters, but all of them really know so much about just the NRC and CA protests and the NRC and CA as citizenship crisis mechanisms as well. So the thing is, the next few questions will focus specifically on the legal processes involved in declaring a person as a devoter. The IMDT Act placed the burden of proof on the state to prove the. Sorry, I'm so sorry. The IMDT Act placed the burden of proof on the state to prove the citizenship status of the individuals. However, in the year 2005, the Supreme Court scrapped the IMDT Act and shifted the onus on the alleged foreigners to prove their citizenship in Foreigners Tribunal proceedings. Why was the shift made in the first place? And what are the risks involved when the burden of proof lies on the accused, and in this case, specifically the devoters?
Okay, so I think first we have to understand the IMDT Act and then what has happened to it over a period of time. So the illegal migrants determinant the IMDT illegal migrant determinant by tribunal. This act is is a response. I mean, as part of the Assam Accord, it came as a response to the large scale of protest and violent protest in Assam against the coming of the so-called illegal migrants into the region. So IMDT was seen as a solution to the this long-term crisis, like large chunk of population coming to the region. So when it was originally formulated, one of the major feature of IMDT Act was that if somebody identified a person as an illegal migrant, the responsibility of proving their illegality or proving their illegality is actually lies upon the person who accuses, right? Suppose if in a village, if somebody identifies somebody or say report that this person is an illegal migrant, the one who actually accuses, one who identifies the person will have the responsibility to prove that this person does not belong to the nation, right? So, this procedure, and there is some kind of a financial part also involved, like you have to pay some amount of money, small amount of money to register a case and so on. So this over a period of time, like maybe like over a decade and so on, it is proved that IMDT is not effective to detect the illegal migrant, because only a handful of people were actually identified and detected as illegal migrant, because people don't want to accuse somebody even if they think or identify somebody, because you have the responsibility then to prove it and so on. So IMDT is seen as largely as an ineffective policy by people who are strongly standing or arguing that there is a lot of illegal migrants here. So so there was a political assertion over a period of time. I mean, in 1980s, 85 and so on, when the IMDT came into force, people were, I mean, there was some kind of a peace in the place because thinking that this would actually help. But there is a realization of after a period of time that this would actually work. This will not work in terms of sending the illegal migrants back. I mean, this is a position of a dominant section in Assam. So, but this has also led to then, because of these political mobilizations and political debate around this issue, there was also simultaneous process of legal battle, right? So there has been political organizations who are actively involved, not just mobilize the people, but also legally contesting it, saying that this is not the actual procedure that need to be followed, and invoking the history of illegal migration in India and the procedures of deportation, detection, and so on. So there has been several other legal interventions in the past, not necessarily in Assam, but other parts of the country, like the question of India-Pakistan partition, and then the process of detection and deporting back, etc. So some of the earlier legal debates and clauses were invoked, and showed that the responsibility of proving the citizenship should not lie on the one who accuses, but upon the one who is being accused. So it is such a legal battle, prolonged deep legal battle, eventually led to the termination of the IMDT Act. So it was scrapped, and then from 2005 on, Supreme Court scrapped it, and then onwards, it is decided that the responsibility is lying upon the one who is actually accused. So if I'm identified as an illegal migrant, then I have the responsibility to prove that I'm a citizen if I want to stay back, and if I want to get the benefit of a citizen. So this has serious implications in the life of the people who have been under the scanner of state, especially the devoter category, right? Because when I looked at the history of devoters and those who were sent to the detention center, in my work, I have interviewed people who have lived in detention center, and I realized that a lot of them are actually detained after 2005, after this, scrapping of IMDT. And because after this, there has been an accentuated process of state intervention to detect the illegal migrants. And a lot of people who were in the voter category turned out to be illegal migrants because they started getting the notifications from the state, to produce their proof as citizens in front of the Foreigners Tribunal. And many have failed because of various reasons, and there were a greater risk of being detected. And in fact, many were actually detected. So, and because people also didn't know the changed scenario, because these are poor people who lives in the interiors and hardly have any exposure to education or awareness about their status. They didn't know that they have actually the responsibility to prove their citizenship. So, so this has led to the detection of many of these population, and ended up in temporary detention centers, which are still there in Assam.
Okay, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. So when you talk about the owners being shifted from the state to the people who are considered as alleged foreigners, there's a lot of emphasis which is put on documents. So foreigners tribunals base their citizenship inquiry on the documentary proofs of legacy and linkage provided by the alleged foreigners. Furthermore, simply providing documents does not confirm one's claim to Indian citizenship. The Foreigners Tribunals have certain standards for determining which documents are valid forms of evidence. For instance, the land documents are not accepted in most of the cases. So my question to you is, what are some of the documents that are acceptable in the process? How does the emphasis placed on the documents further risk the citizenship status of the devoters, given that most of the people do not really possess the documents in the first place?
Yes, so we need to understand, like, what is the basis of this, documentation and proof of citizenship. So in my view, the state assumes, state actually takes family as the unit of, citizenship, right? Even though it is about political status, family becomes the ultimate unit, that you have to prove your belongingness to the nation and the region through your ancestral relationship. So there are two things involved in it. One is that, you have to have documents which prove that you lived in India before March 25th, 1971. So you have to, those who have who have lived in India and want to prove that, will have to show their documents, certain documents which are prior to 1971, March 25th as the cutoff. So this, would involve like several documents. So there are actually two lists, list A and list B. So list A is primarily about pre-1971. So this will be like electoral roll, NRS electoral roll up to March 25th, 1971. NRC of 1951, where your name is registered, land and tenancy record, citizenship certificate, permanent residence certificate, passport, bank or LIC document, or permanent residential certificate, educational certificate, or some sort of court order, or refugee registration certificate. These are some of the major documents. If you possess and if you are able to prove your identity, then you are considered as Indian citizens. And there is a list B, like those who are born after 1971, right? Cannot prove with their own document that they belongs to this region or nation, right? So they have to prove their linkage with their parents, right? So that's why I said, the family as a unit and the generational link becomes quite central in establishing your identity as Indian. So they have to show documents which would prove their ancestral connections. So the family genealogy, the family tree is what they say is family tree has to be drawn. So for that, say it will be like, say, through land document or birth certificate, or bank or documents pertaining to LIC or ration card, electoral rolls. Some of these documents would prove your association with the person you claim as your parents. So this is how having this sort of document would enable you to kind of prove your citizenship. So this is an extremely difficult difficult procedure for a large chunk of population, for the reason that people do not possess documents. Because if you leave Assam, if you look at other parts of the country, even in relatively educated places in Kerala, until very recently, many people have not possessed proper documents, because people never used it and they didn't have to show any documents. It's only in the recent past, because of the Aadhaar card and other sorts of paper necessities, that made people to kind of becoming more aware about the necessity of using it. So so one is to procure the document all of a sudden is difficult, because people don't have access to it. People don't know how to make it, and also there are many other factors, like, say, even if you have documents, there are errors in the documents. The spelling of the names may be different. It may not matches with some other documents. Your parents' name and your names appear in different ways in different documents. So you struggle, and sometimes age discrepancies and so on. So it becomes extremely difficult to sort of show the linkage, because of largely, if you say discrepancies in the documents, the mismatches between documents, and also absence of documents, because many people don't have land records. They don't have even land, and there are factors like displacement. People who lives in the riverine island do not have a document of themselves. Some got displaced because of the flood and erosion of land and so on. So there are a lot of hurdles for people, especially those who have come under the scanner of D voters, to prove their citizenship, because of the difficulty of showcasing the documents that the state is asking for.
Okay, yeah. As you already mentioned about floods, my next question to you is also about floods. So, Assam, with a vast network of rivers, is prone to natural disasters like the floods. In fact, an article was published in the Federal and it highlighted how several people in the Kachar district lost most of their documents to the floods last year. How does the Foreigners Tribunal take into consideration the loss of important documents to natural calamities such as floods? Is there any other way of proving one's citizenship status without the possession of documents?
There is no, in my understanding, like there is absolutely no provision made to protect the people who actually lost their land because of the flood, and people, and a lot of people, in fact, have, as you pointed out, like suffered because of this crisis. So, uh, so as far as I understand, I mean, there are a lot of cases. In fact, if you look at not the NRC, if you look at the past scenario, uh, the devoters who happen to live in detention centers, in my interviews, I have encountered a couple of people who have said that one of the reasons was because of multiple displacement that they had to encounter due to the flood. So move from their original land to somewhere else, from there to somewhere else, and they were not carrying any documents per se. So, and land documents becomes one of the important criterion or identity for people to show their belongingness, right? So, and this is something the state is not really taken into consideration, and because of that, a lot of people actually lost their, citizenship status.
Okay, yeah. The border police is mandated to detect illegal migrants, and therefore, as a part of the process, they refer the names of devoters to the foreigners' tribunals. However, a report by the Scroll mentioned that the border police does not perform its duties as required by the law, as most of the time they do not complete local verification or they are done mostly at random. How do personal biases, prejudices, and motivations on the part of bureaucratic state members and legal officers affect the process? What are some of the other ways in which personal biases play a role in denying citizenship to some people?
Um, like the devoters, I mean, referred cases are you know uh, cases that has existed since long, like since 1990s and so on, where border police is entrusted to identify the illegal migrants, and then they would procedurally go through the process of taking their rights, or detecting the people. So there are like cluster of villages which would come under the purview of one border police entity, and then the police who would work for that. So and this has been there until very recent, and still I think border reference cases and the border policing is very active in Assam. So the talking about the bias in the process of detection, I mean, there are a lot of stories I have heard from the field. That one is that there are situations where the police officials were given instructions by the state that you need to have these certain number of cases that you should identify in a month. So you have to fill in that quota. You have to, fill in that. So there is a pressure to do that, and for that reason, they would randomly pick up people and then register the case. So this happens in the heightened political circumstances, and the state agencies also want to kind of showcase that they are doing this job of detecting the illegal migrants. So the bias involved in the whole process is like, there are a lot of examples. In fact, I have gathered from my field experience in Assam, especially while talking to the detained people. One is that how the say, for example, religious identity do matters in certain instances, like certain physical appearance of the people, their markers, their identity as a particular population, not just Bengali speaking, but within the Bengali speaking, the religious affiliation, do give some kind of suspicion. So this, suspicion is not just a state thing or state agency or police thing. I mean, there's also societal, notions about it, right? I mean, certain cultural markers and certain suspicion in the everyday life about certain population as the essential other of yours is also, in a sense, percolated into the official bureaucratic realm. So we can see, how such prejudices actually lead to the assumption that, okay, this person is actually a Bangladeshi or illegal migrant, and so on. So, but the process is involved in in detecting the people has been extremely arbitrary in nature. That I got the narratives like, from nowhere suddenly you get the papers, a kind of legal notification, and stating that you are suspected as an illegal migrant, and now you have to produce certain documents, and you have to appear in the court, you have to go to police station, etc. So this and then then for a long time there won't be any further action, and then suddenly one day police would come and pick the person and saying that, we are directed to pick you into the detention center. So they have to go to the police station and do certain kind of procedures, and then they are taken into in a police vehicle to the detention center. So some of the narratives from the field are really, kind of, I mean, very, very difficult stories, like say when they were leading a normal life, on a fine day suddenly police come and pick them, and then even the family members are not informed, and they get to know about it after a few days, and people are not prepared even to go to the detention centers. So there are a lot of such, arbitrary acts from the state. But beyond that, we can also see that there are certain instances where how religious markers becomes a matter. Like say one example I can give, when one Muslim man was identified, his name is Kalu Miya, when he was identified as an illegal migrant, police went to his house, and in the process of looking at his documents, they identified his wife, and wife is then accused as illegal migrant. And what happened over a period of time is that husband has proven his citizenship, and he was not detained, but his wife was detained. And she also proved her citizenship, right, citizenship over a period of time, but she had to live in the detention center for a couple of years. So here we can see the, the gender dimension, like you have a suspicion about the male member as illegal migrant, and you assume that the partner is also, illegal migrant, and both are actually Indian citizens and proven their citizenship over a period of time. But in between, wife had to live in the detention center, and her, life went into such a horrible situation, having kid and family out, there, and then she is forced to live in the detention center. Likewise, I can give another example of how a border woman who married to a Muslim man, and then changed her name because she converted to Islam, and because her after her first husband died, she married a Muslim man. So when the police came to inquire about the status, they found some kind of incongruency in the records, and her current identity as as a Muslim woman is being picked up by the police, and then that has led to the categorization of her as a doubtful, as a suspected illegal migrant. So what I'm indicating is that certain kind of discrepancies in the documents, and also the identity of the person, religious identities at times do matter in defining or understanding who is a migrant and who is a citizen.
I really appreciate the way you brought in your fieldwork that you conducted. And I also especially like the way you brought up the topic about, how value is placed on quantity and not just quality, and how the emphasis on quantity itself, it creates a broader argument, and it it leads to, different people suffering in different ways. So there are also a lot of cases that I've heard, about how local verification is not done, and actually the people have they don't even live there in the addresses anymore, and the notices are actually sent to those older addresses. So this also tells a lot about how the local verification that is done, which it is done in a very random manner like that. And moving on to the last question for today, an article was published in the Hindustan Times last year that stated that the Foreigners Tribunal notice was sent against an individual who reportedly died 6 years ago. And the notice actually asked him to appear before the court. And meanwhile, there are also reports of several cases where a person alone is declared a voter and not their siblings or parents. What do such instances reflect about the arbitrary and anomalous nature of citizenship exclusion? What do these demonstrate about the lack of transparency involved in the process and the lack of accountability on part of the legal authorities and bureaucratic state machinery? And lastly, what, according to you, is the way forward for the devoters?
Like as we have already discussed, like, there is a lot of arbitrariness in the way in which bureaucracy actually deal with the question of, so-called illegal migration. And we have to see that, the arbitrariness has profound impact in the life of the people, uh, precisely because, I mean, at times there are stringent measures. Like, earlier I said that devoters, and I wanted to bring this point, which I have not explained earlier, that devoters is I mean, is a status which is not completely taking the rights of the people, but not giving the full citizenship rights. Right? So people live with that status. They learn to live with the status, and it's suddenly, state come up with certain kind of stringent policy, like now NRC, but earlier also like stringent actions. Police come up with certain kind of, sudden papers and so on. So this, so people who live, I mean, you have first, create a condition that, people are not really conscious of keeping their documents in their hand, or, it's okay to live with the status of the voters, because beyond a point, it doesn't matter, at the maximum, you will not get certain kind of benefit, but you will never be picked up. That's the kind of impression that people had. So, but over a period of time, because of the sudden actions, you will see, like, police suddenly coming or giving the documents, they're asking the documents, or asked to go to the Foreigners Tribunal, and people fail to produce the documents and then ending up in detention centers. So, coming to the point of this, the consequences of the arbitrariness and the illogical dimension of the illegal migrant question, because you're right in saying that, there are, even in the context of NRC, in fact, there are many cases in the context of NRC, a lot of, parents are identified as illegal migrants and children are identified as Indian citizens, which is logically not, cannot be true, right? Or within the family, there are certain, some people are identified as illegal. I mean, husband and wife is fine, but if you have kids who are Indians and parents who are, Bangladeshis, I mean, there's some kind of illogical or, impossible situation. So, or as you rightly said, people who died are getting the, notification and so on. So, these are all, clear evidence of, how how haphazardly the NRC process is being carried out without having a proper documentation of, things. And even, I mean, people who have worked in the army, who have served the Indian, government services, like school teachers, army officials, etc., were also included or excluded from the NRC list. So how is it possible, people who serve the nation, getting excluded from the citizenship right? So what it points is about the anomalies in the process of, and the bureaucratic errors involved in the process, the lack of scientific approach to identify, if at all one want to identify the so-called illegal migrants. And also, as I indicated earlier, like people are not conscious of furnishing appropriate data. People, I mean, even to de-voters, especially when it comes to the matter of illegalizing the de-voters, many of them do not have even awareness about how to legally challenge it, how to approach a lawyer. They don't have the financial capacity to go for a good lawyers. Lawyers take up their problems, but do not actually, some of the lawyers do not seriously take their cases, and because of that, they end up in jail. Or if you don't pay adequate money, and ordinary people can't pay such amount to the lawyers, they don't take it seriously. There are a lot of instances where I got the narrative that the lawyers were not helping out properly, or they were not able to approach or find out the appropriate lawyers. And there are cases even people have to sell their properties to legally fight their case, because those who have a bit of a land would have to sell their land to fight the case for their partner, their children, or their parents, and so on, because ultimately you want to live with them, so you have to leave whatever you have if you want to legally fight, because you need to have good financial support to have constant legal battle with the states. This has been the plight of the de-voters for a long time in Assam. So I really don't know how to suggest a way forward, but it is important for us to challenge these sort of state practices, constantly hearing the voice of the subjects out there in the field, and bringing their predicaments into the public debate, and then kind of suggesting possible solutions to the authorities how to handle the situation, because mere illegalization of people and detaining them in the detention center is inhuman in nature, and there has to be a viable solution, and viable solution cannot be made in a haphazard way. Like, it need to have much more deeper thoughts about how to deal with the question of citizenship crisis in contemporary times.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very, very informative conversation with you. There were so many things that I was not aware of, and this conversation actually highlighted all of those. There is an urgent need for the anomalies and the inadequacies in the process of determining de-voters to be addressed as well as redressed. Thank you so much for taking your time, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, Samrakni. It was a pleasure to be here in this platform and interact with you. Thank you for raising those very interesting and important questions, and reflecting on some of these issues, and allowing me to speak on on this pertinent topic. Thanks a lot.